Hello. Welcome everyone to the live streaming event for Jemele Hill's new memoir of Hill. I'm Shannon Chris, Jemele's editor at her publisher Holt. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, Jemele's Detroit native friend, will be joining us soon, but for now, I'm just going to kick things off. I have the immense pleasure of editing Jemele's new project and working alongside her, and we're happy to have you at this um, signing. But now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jemele Hill, the Atlantic journalist and former ESPN SportsCenter co-anchor. Hi, Jemele.
Hey, how are you? It's a pleasure to be here. This is going to be a treat for me because up until I guess a week ago, I had never done a book signing, and now I'm doing an online book signing. So this is going to be really interesting to see how this works.
Okay. I just want to start with, and I know a little bit of background about, why you decided to write a memoir, but I always think it's really interesting to kind of find an author's inspiration behind writing about their life and what moved you to write a memoir, and especially now.
Well, it was a lot of interest in my story, which I was actually kind of surprised by. And I know that may seem weird for somebody who's been in the public eye as long as I've been in the public eye. But I guess even though I give my opinion for a living, and people must be interested on that in some level, because otherwise, why would they even listen to me or react to me at all? But this was a little bit different because this is about me not opining on who is going to win the AFC East or some other sports topics or even some of the news of the day that combine politics, sports, gender, or culture. This is about me. And I've never been a person who went halfway and did anything. And once the decision was made that it was going to be indeed a memoir, I just decided, to use another sports analogy, I wasn't going to leave any plays on the field.
Right. Full throttle for sure. Can you tell us a little bit, the book released October 25th, which was last week. Can you tell us a little bit how the last week has been, how eventful? I know a lot of signings. We joked about maybe your hands. Do you use both hands to write? Because you've been signing a lot of books. So can you just talk about like what you've been doing the last week?
The last week has been crazy. I mean, when I was, first promoted to SportsCenter anchor, and we did a round of publicity then when we started the show back in 2017. Um, I thought we did a lot of publicity then. This pales in comparison to that. So there's been some very long days, for sure. I mean, they've been very rewarding because I've been able to appear on so many different platforms, from Red Table Talk to the Breakfast Club to, a lot of local news, shows, and just a ton of media. I mean, I think the first day I might have done like 10 different media hits. It was crazy. And so I've gone from New York to Baltimore to DC. Today I'm in San Francisco. I was in LA where I live as well, promoting the book. But it's been really cool to kind of see in real time people's reaction and response to it. And I've been, extremely blown away by how positive it's been, by people relating and sharing their own personal stories with me. And yeah, it's just been really a treat to see that, all the hard work that I put into writing this and, really exposing myself, to see it be so warmly received by a lot of people has been very endearing and rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to add that you can go to premiercollectibles.com/Jemele to purchase a signed copy. There's a link below. And I got my signed copy last week on October 25th in New York. And I think that's also like just so cool to have a personalized copy, especially when it's from someone you adore. So I'm going to move on to more questions. A lot of them are related to the memoir. Do you feel there's a lot of themes in this memoir? And I think you had mentioned a lot of people relating to the themes of this memoir, or certain things that you said that they experienced in their childhood too, or even in the workforce. Do you feel like there's a central theme to this book, or like maybe a central takeaway that you want people to walk away with?
Well, I mean, I would say that probably the central takeaway is that you shouldn't let your circumstances, no matter how unusual, bad, or even complicated really dictate how you see yourself um, and the future you want to build. And even though I obviously went through some pretty traumatic stuff, as many of you read about in the book, I didn't let that stop me from trying to accomplish the type of peace in life that I felt like that I deserved. Because I think that's kind of a big part of it too, is that a lot of times when you're in those traumatic circumstances, you can convince yourself very easily that you do not deserve better. And what happens is, you begin to live a life that reflects that. Like, because you don't think you deserve better, you tend to kind of act that way. And the one thing I think that was a saving grace for me is that I always thought I deserved better, that I deserved the type of life that was devoid of the trauma that I was experiencing. And I worked, I guess, very hard to accomplish that by doing the opposite of everything the adults in my life were doing.
Amen to that. You were doing an interview last week, and you had mentioned just like being in a room, and especially for people of color, women of color, like we're not supposed to be here, and kind of like living that mentality. And I feel like you've done the opposite, and it's been very inspirational, I know, to a lot of your readers. But to me, as your editor, I think just working in a field that doesn't usually have people of color that we're seeing, and like having someone just be unapologetically themselves has been like really impactful. So but speaking of therapy, and like, just the therapeutic process of writing this book, this is a question that I already kind of you've hinted at a little bit before, but was this writing process, especially because you are used to writing like more journalistic articles, was this writing process very cathartic, and how so? And was there anything that you were nervous about sharing with the public?
Well, I would say, I don't know if therapeutic would be the right word, because there's a lot of things that I discussed in the book that I frankly had already kind of dealt with in my mind. I mean, there were a few things that that in the process of writing and kind of reliving it, that I had a different perspective on, at this moment, as opposed to maybe when it happened. And or that there was some other additional wrinkle as I was writing and trying to really capture what my perspective was, that kind of exposed itself like out of nowhere. And I was like, oh, hmm, I didn't even think about it in those terms. So it forced me to think a little more deeply about some things. I think it also forced me to, come to the realization that just because I locked the stuff away didn't mean that it was necessarily fully dealt with, if you will. So, I mean, I think I was gentle with myself throughout the entire writing process. But yeah, there were definitely points during it where I got really emotional just in writing it, reliving it, and almost trying to put myself back in the same space that I was when it initially happened. Which may not have been the healthiest thing to do sometimes, I guess, but I was trying to capture a moment and capture, a feeling. But it is much different when you're writing about yourself, because you're not only writing about you, you're writing about real people who are going to read this too and have their own reactions to it as well. And so I was just very cognizant of that, and I tried to be intentional about not necessarily sharing other people's stories, if you know what I mean. Like, wasn't trying to snitch on anybody
Yeah,
necessarily.
right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for example, it was a very intentional choice not to use the real name of during when I disclosed I have an abortion, not to use the real name of the person that I was involved with. I did that on purpose because I don't frankly know if they've ever told anybody, and
Yeah.
I wanted to give them the right to tell their own side of the story if they chose to share it at all. But I didn't want to take away that sense of agency for them, so I was very intentional about that. And even when discussing the affair my mother had, or with a married man, like, I purposely didn't name that person, um, because I don't know what his family knows or what they don't know, or even if they do know at all. I have no idea what his situation is, especially since, as I wrote about in the book, it was very awkward about the fact that, you know, um, somebody in his family reached out to me on Facebook, which was like, I don't think you're
Wow.
aware of how, this your relative knows me. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, so yeah, I was very careful about that. And that's not to say, I know some people could argue like, but do they really even deserve that? I was like, well, maybe not. I mean, that's certainly arguable, but what I definitely wanted to do is make sure it was something I could live with. And I'm like, as disgraceful as his behavior was, I don't think that warrants me just telling the world like who he is and possibly hurting his immediate family in the process. Like that to me would have been no good. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think all the things that I would have been nervous about, I made sure that um, I did it in such a way that I really, was quite at peace with all the things I shared and all the things that were in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we have Michael Eric Dyson joining us. So I'm going to switch over a little bit and introduce, yes, the D. I'm going to introduce Georgetown University psychology professor and New York Times bestselling author Michael Eric Dyson, who'll be joining us. Hey, Michael, we were just talking about well, the next question that we have from one of the viewers is, what advice would Jemele give to a young journalist? So we're picking up from there.
Okay.
Right. Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Jemele Hill, a Detroit legend. There's no question. Her book is phenomenal at such a young age to tell a story that is so necessary in regards to and into the struggle for racial self-determination and the ability to move forward. And I'm sorry, y'all. I'm in a Sky Club here. The Phillies are mad because they got shut out by Houston last night, so it's kind of rough. But I think that, can you talk to us about Detroit and what happened to introduce a person like you or a Jalen Rose, myself an exception, but such assertive, self-confident Black people who, regardless of the consequences, continue to speak up and pay the price for it. I just think that there's something in the Jemele Hill with your unique genius, but talk to us a bit about that, if you don't mind.
First of all, thank you, Mike, for joining me and for doing this, and of course for the wonderful words that you wrote about the book itself. And as always, your vocabulary is stunning. I was like, you drop bars, my man, every time that you talk, and so I have a deep affection for you. But I want to answer a question that Shannon asked before you hopped on, and I'll get to your question about Detroit and kind of it being a character in its book in itself, and just my affection for the city. She asked, a younger journalist asked what advice I would have for them, and I would say this is work on the craft, work on your development. Um, I know that these days I get so many young people that come up to me and say, "How do I build my brand?" And I hate that question because you can't have a brand if you don't have a product, right? Like, don't worry about building your brand. Like that just sounds a little weird, especially coming from a journalist. Worry about, learning how to tell a story, learning how to interview people, get information that people don't want to tell you, learning how to be resourceful, to develop and build sources. Like those are the things that are part of the core beliefs of journalism. At the end of the day, this is a profession that is about truth telling and truth seeking. And so always make sure you're doing one of those two things, if not both simultaneously. And if you work on your craft, you work on developing all those things that you probably want and see for yourself, they'll come right along. Another thing I would probably add to that as well is that don't get locked into going to a specific place. A lot of young journalists I meet, they ask me, well, how do I get to ESPN? How I got to ESPN? I didn't think about getting to ESPN. That's how I got to ESPN. It's like ESPN was never on my vision board. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's a great place to work. It's the biggest sports media vehicle in America, but it's a place. I mean, you could be offered a great job elsewhere and ESPN may not never even come into the picture. So don't limit yourself into thinking like I have to wind up in this place when there may be someplace better that you hadn't even considered. Now to get to your question, Mike, about Detroit. The city of Detroit, obviously, I have great affection for being from there. West Sider, Mumford High School, went to Beaubien Middle School. And so, as you know this, Mike, that Detroit has a certain resiliency. The Detroit people are just built different. Like there's nobody like us in the country. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, growing up in Detroit and living there and seeing how the city's reputation is discussed elsewhere. A lot of times people really don't have a lot of good things to say about Detroit. People look down their nose at Detroit, and we take that very personally. And that actually makes us have even more pride in our city than we already do, which seems impossible given the amount of pride that we have. Detroiters want to remind you about the good things that come out of Detroit, about the good things happening in Detroit, and just about some more of the positive shapings that are going on there, because for so long the only time you ever saw Detroit in the national news was because of the murder rate or because of Devil's Night or something that was always negative. And so that's why we remind you about the fact that we had a whole music genre and music legacy birthed in Detroit, and at one point that Detroit was one of the richest cities in the world because of the auto industry. And so all these things that are a part of our legacy as a city, we are happy to remind you of them because we know you've only heard bad things about Detroit. And I think because it's a tough city, it's a resilient city, it's a blue collar city, we just take that attitude with us wherever we go. Even if we're in white collar professions, we still operate within them with a blue collar attitude, about grinding and hustling. That's what Detroit is about. And those are characteristics and traits that never leave you, no matter stage, no matter what platform that you are, And so that's why, even though I've been putting in like these 14-hour days and doing all these book signings and media appearances and obviously things like this, it's not a bother to me because the hustle is built within me, and a lot of that comes from Detroit. One of my favorite T-shirts my husband has is "Detroit hustles harder," and it's the truth. We just hustle harder.
Amen. When you were speaking of, and I know there are other questions, but I'm so excited. When we speak now about journalism, a lot of journalists, you see majors going through changes. I won't name their name, major cable companies. Well, we got to tack more to be less, progressive. Fox News has no worries about being. What do you say about the journalistic bugaboo of object and neutrality, and how objectivity and neutrality have often, as opposed to producing journalism that speaks equally to all communities?
I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because I do think a huge issue in journalism right now is this whole both sidesism that they keep trying to do. And I think in many ways, networks, some, journalists individually have decided to behave cowardly in the sense of like not understanding that our job is to be fair. Our job is not to be necessarily objective, right? And I know that may sound weird to people because they're like, "Oh, you're a journalist. You're supposed to be objective." No, you're supposed to tell the truth, and the truth is not always objective. The truth is what it is. There is in a lot of situations a clear right and a clear wrong. I mean, the original charge of all journalists, talking from the days from the Hearst family on into to Ida B. Wells. The job of a journalist is to be the watchdogs of society. When Ida B. Wells was reporting on lynchings, she was not taking an objective viewpoint on that. There was a very clear truth that was happening. Black people were being racially terrorized in this country, and she wrote about it to the point where her life was at threat. All her life was being threatened and at risk all the time because she chose to take a truth and expose it before the world about what some of the horrors of lynching were. In today's media landscape, with this false notion of objectivity and hiding behind objectivity, you know, you might have a news organization getting the pro and con side of lynching. Okay, that's and
Right,
you see
right.
how ridiculous that
Hey,
sounds,
hey, speaking
but
about
that
that,
is how.
I can piggyback on.
Did he freeze or did?
I just realized I'm muted. Michael's frozen. I'm
Yes.
muted.
Okay. I was like, am I crazy? What happened?
No. This happens all the time in meetings with, you know, quarantine pressures. But I think Michael's back with us. So.
Okay. What was your question, Mike? You go ahead.
Can y'all hear me again? Okay.
Yeah, we got
Can
you.
you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I was saying piggybacking. Is there a specific responsibility of a Black journalist in traditions of both insight and resistance? Is there a specific as a journalist of color, in this case, a Black journalist, to represent true side, or that other white journalists?
I think yeah, Mike froze again, but I think I got the gist of his question about whether or not, as a Black journalist, you have a different and very specific responsibilities in how you report, and I believe that, and I don't think it's something that we should see as a burden. As a Black journalist, you have a very unique and different insight into your own community, into some of the issues that have gone unaddressed, or completely uncovered. Period. I mean, you know, I think about the reporting of Wesley Lowry, who's a friend of mine, and the reporting that he's done on police brutality since Ferguson. And as a Black man in this country, who has been racially profiled, he understands what that means. And because he does have an understanding for what that means, I think it has allowed him to shed light on the pervasiveness of state-sanctioned violence against Black people. You know, now the Washington Post keeps a database of police killings, and this was all coming out of Ferguson and all coming out of Wesley Lowry's reporting. So that to me is like a prime example of how you being Black gives you a particular insight and introspection and perspective in into a vulnerable community that you're also a part of. You understand it. You understand, say, the water crisis in Jackson, and why that has gotten to the critical point that it has gotten to, knowing that the fact that this is a majority Black city in a state where white leadership has purposely, very purposely, you know, denied this city its ability to get a basic right, which is clean water. And so you understand the institutional racism that is a part of that tragedy. And that might be something that a white journalist may not understand as well, or be able to explain as well, or even ask an extra layer of questioning that sheds light on the fact that it's institutional. And the same thing in Flint, or about the fact that, you know, environmental racism is real. And these are issues that, as Black journalists, I think it's incumbent upon us to discuss and bring awareness to these issues, bring it to light, and, you know, also deliver a sense of justice. So, you know, I think there's a tremendous amount of responsibility that Black journalists have, especially, you know, I'll just take my particular field in sports. You know, I think part of the reason why you're seeing so many different athletes now, who have their own platforms, who are telling their own stories and shaping their own narratives, is because, frankly, they were frustrated with how white sports media is. I mean, 85 to 90% of the jobs in sports media are held by white men. And because of this, I think they got really tired of having to explain themselves to people who did not, in their minds, understand them, explaining their background and, explaining their social economic status, or just other things just about them, about how the world sees them differently as a Black male athlete. And as a result of that, they decided that they would start their own platforms. And, to me, that was just a direct reflection of how they weren't covered. And, the fact that you have sports journalists who don't understand that the dynamic of Black labor, white ownership, and mostly white fan bases creates a lot of tension. It creates a lot of jealousy. It creates a lot of other things that are definitely a part of sports. And so, we have to be able to report and shape that because it's very important to the overall narrative of Black athletes.
Yeah, I think we lost Michael again, but we have another question that came in, and it says, like, what influenced you to wanting to be a journalist? And that kind of leads in from your last question that Michael asked you. But was there like a particular inspiration for you?
No, I mean, for me, it actually started from a very basic standpoint of loving sports and also loving writing as well. I love them both. And when I figured out that you can do it for a living, I was hooked. I was sold because, I was the neighborhood tomboy. I also was a voracious reader. I wrote a lot more on the creative end when I was younger in terms of short stories and poems and, whole books sometimes that I would just fiction novels that I would write. And so, because I had a natural attraction, to sports and to writing, when I was in high school, I joined my high school newspaper staff. And as they say, the rest is history.
Okay, we have a fun question. What's your favorite memory from being on SportsCenter or His and Hers on ESPN?
Ooh, that is a good question. Probably for me, I think my favorite memories probably are of some of the goofy skits we used to do because one, I can't believe they actually let us do this and put it on television, no doubt. But we did a skit that was we recreated a scene from Boys in the Hood, and I actually drank a 40 ounce on air. It was real 40, real beer, and it was pretty dope to say I'm the only ESPN personality in the history of the network who's ever drank a 40 on national television. So that was a lot of fun. Um, and I mean, I think the skits are will always be near and dear to my heart. I mean, we had plenty of like amazing conversations for sure on SportsCenter and on His and Hers, but that was kind of the best commercial our show had. We when we recreated the Anchorman fight scene, that was like pretty epic. I thought that was kind of our it couldn't get any better than that. I was like, oh, we should retire these kids after we do this Anchorman one because there's no way we're gonna be able to top this. And we always found a way to top it. That Anchorman skit, we used to joke the reason why our show couldn't go to the Super Bowl or some of these other major sporting events is because we blew all the money lighting a man on fire in the ESPN parking lot, which is true. We really did light a man on fire in the parking lot, and we had a horse in the ESPN parking lot. That's where we filmed that entire scene at, and it cost six figures to shoot that. And all the ESPN personalities, they graciously donated their time, which we very much appreciated. And it was really a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of work went into doing those. I mean, that Coming to America skit that we did, that was like an 8-9 hour shoot. That was crazy. And so, but it was worth it, because that was something that, people certainly were not doing on sports television.
Yeah, I see Michael's joined us back, but I'm just gonna kind of segue into like we're talking about SportsCenter, and it doesn't have to be on SportsCenter because you have a podcast too. But what has been one of your favorite interviews, and like who's somebody on your bucket list that you're looking to interview?
Well, man, this is always going to sound, like I'm deflecting the question when I say this, but my favorite interview is really every interview, and the reason why I say that, or I should say, I'll say that is the case for the podcast for sure. My favorite interview is every interview, and that is because I'm humbled by the fact that these really incredible people, these really famous people would spend an hour of their time sitting down and talking with me. And it's not easy, to get Idris Elba to talk to you for 45 minutes. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not. Dude is busy. He lives in London. Like, it's not easy to get that done. I mean, it took us like 3 years to get that interview. So, or to get an hour from Issa Rae, or from Regina King, or all those people, Michael B. Jordan, that I've been able to have on the podcast like that. It's just not easy to accomplish. So I'm always grateful when they sit down with me. It's funny though. It's like everybody always be asking me the best interview I've had. Nobody asked me the worst interview I've ever had, and that's an easy one. Like, it's hard for me to answer the best, but the worst by far was Manny Pacquiao. Like, it's like nobody is going to be worse than Manny Pacquiao, and we had him on His and Hers one time, and there was a bit of he gave us one word answers, and the interview was so bad. And this never happens in TV, because in TV the whole point is to fill the hour. We actually cut that interview short because he was so bad. And all we did was make fun of how bad the interview was the rest of the show. So even though it was a bad interview, it still wound up providing us a moment. But put it this way, if Manny Pacquiao's people ever come to me asking if I want to interview him, that might be the quickest no in history to an interview. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoy in the podcast format, sitting down with people and getting to learn about what makes them them, and also what drives them, what disappoints them, their failures, and all of that. And so I'm really, as always, impressed with the raw honesty that they're able to give me.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a question for you from Tyler from Georgia. He wants to know what you did early on in your career, and you've touched on this a little bit, but to kind of like perfect your craft in your space, like what you did early on, like how you started, and like kind of how you got to where you are today.
So, yeah, I mean, I was really lucky because I figured out very early that I wanted to pursue sports journalism. So getting the early jump was really important. So as I mentioned, when I was in 10th or 11th grade, I joined my high school newspaper staff. So I started writing and figuring out how to put together a story, interviewing people, and just kind of understanding the basics of journalism. Good old inverted pyramid. All my journalism nerds know what that is. Um, but so I started doing that, and then because of the way the high school newspaper is produced in Detroit at the time, I don't know if it's still this way anymore, but the Detroit Free Press, the professional paper, they had an insert once a month in the paper that had all the high school newspapers in it. So to produce your paper at your high school, you actually had to go down to the Free Press to put your paper together. And so I went down to the Free Press, which was my first exposure to a professional newsroom. And I loved it. I mean, it was just an electric atmosphere. I got really hooked on it. And at some point, my journalism teacher, she nagged me endlessly about applying to this program that the Free Press had, where they took 10 area Detroit high school students and they gave them a summer job, a summer apprenticeship, as they call it. And so for 6 weeks, you learned about the ins and outs of journalism, and how to be a journalist and what that meant. And they gave you 2 mentors. So I wrote an essay, got into the program, and got assigned 2 mentors, and learned even more. And the woman who ran the program, Dr. Louise Reed Ritchie, she was a taskmaster. She was no joke. So she stayed on us about our, putting together a resume, and how to be professional, and how to present ourselves, and how to interview people, and how to talk to people. And it was the same year that the National Association of Black Journalists Convention was in Detroit. And so she took us to NABJ, and she made us register and made us pass out resumes and walk up to people we did not know who were recruiters or editors, and introduce ourselves. So I had to go up to people and say, "Hi, my name is Jemele Hill. I'm a rising senior at Mumford High School," and like, I had to say that to all these people I didn't even know. So she wanted us to get over a shyness. she also wanted us to very much understand what it took to succeed in the business, and it worked. And so, I joined in ABG then. I've been going ever since. And it was drilled into me early that you needed internships and experience and that you needed to produce clips. So when I got to Michigan State, I worked for my college newspaper, the State News. I had internships every summer. I interned at the Lima News in Lima, Ohio, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Detroit Free Press, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and the News and Observer in Raleigh. So I had all of these internships and my experience, obviously, as a journalist in college. And that was how I built my resume. So my first job out of college was at the News and Observer in Raleigh as a general assignment sports reporter. And so I did print journalism for almost a decade before I even got to ESPN. But I was sort of groomed on the idea that your resume had to be this kind of brick by brick process, where you got internships, you did good stories, and that helped you move to the next level and then the next level. So it was quite the stair step. And when ESPN came calling, I didn't I didn't go to ESPN to be on television. They hired me as a writer for ESPN.com. And it was because of some of the columns I wrote and the opinions I had, it started sticking me on TV. And next thing I know, television was half my job. And then in 2013, I made the full time switch to television when I got my daily show, which was Numbers Never Lie, which then became His and Hers. And then that led to SportsCenter. So what I would say about my path is that it was very non-traditional in the scope of how usually most broadcasters, are made. Like I never interned at a small TV station or anything like that. I didn't, anchoring wasn't where I started. I started off in the commentary space and then transitioned into anchoring. So, you can learn things from people's path, but how you get your first like how you get your first job or how you get your breakout moment, like, those are specifically tailored. And it just so happened that mine was the fact that I wound up at ESPN and then was able to kind of climb through the ranks there and wind up on SportsCenter.
Yeah, I really liked that detail in the book. So like you taking us through kind of like the ups and downs and like especially like your perseverance with going to those conferences and introducing yourself and kind of like forgetting about the shyness. I think that's like so important, especially for young people in this profession. So I'm going to switch gears again. Someone's asked, what do you like to do in your spare time? I guess like maybe outside of writing. Yeah, I'll let you take it over.
Sleep. Sleep. The way I'm gonna sleep after this tour is over is gonna be epic. Trust me. But no, I mean, I love traveling. Traveling is probably like my number one vice. I've been to probably 37, 38 countries. I've been really lucky because more than half of them have been work related, so somebody else has had to foot the bill, which has been amazing. But yeah, I love to travel. Me and my husband both are big, big travelers because the world is really big, and I want to see every part of it. So yeah, I'm trying to think. We went to France this summer. It was actually like our second time going to the south of France. We had been before. Like our honeymoon was like so epic because one, I took a month off, which I'd never done before, and we went to Kenya, Dubai, and the Maldives, and that was really, really spectacular. So yeah, travel is like what I love to do in my spare time.
Oh, that sounds gorgeous. Michael just texted and he said he's so sorry that he's missing the opportunity, but that just kind of shows you the strength of the Detroit because he was trying to get on this link so bad, but his Wi-Fi is just not working. So he's expressing his sincerest apologies to you, Jemele, and also to our audience.
Oh
Okay.
no, that's totally fine. I know I'll run into Mike down the road.
Oh yeah. He has already said that. He's like, I need to catch up with her. So yeah, so he'll definitely be reaching out to you. I just want to remind everyone again that premiercollectibles.com/Jemele is where you can get your signed copy, and there's a link above. Jemele, I don't know if there's any more questions, but we have the questions from answered 22 questions in 2 minutes, and we have a little bit of time. So These can be just like one word answers, but it's like a little fun game that they shot out to me. Okay, so some of these questions we know because we talked about Detroit so much, but where were you born?
Detroit, obviously.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. So it says, who would you want to play in? Who would you want to play you in a movie?
That's so funny because my husband just asked me this question at the book event that he moderated in LA. Um, and I think, well, here's the thing: it would require more than one actor because you got young me, then you got like
Right.
middle school, high school me, and then old me. So I don't know. People say, I guess you always start with who do you physically resemble, and a lot of people think I look like Taraji P Henson. So I'm just gonna pick her.
I can see that. We've talked about this a little bit, but what was your first job? I guess it doesn't have to be your
uh,
first journalism job, but like any first job you had.
Oh, my very first job
Yeah.
was my grandmother was a social worker, and she got me a job in because she was a social worker, and so she handled a lot of like welfare cases is what she did, and her at the time she her case her clients were the elderly, and so in her welfare office where she worked, she got me a job filing. And so filing cases. So I filed welfare cases. Like I started when I was like 13 years old, 13 or 14, which sounds illegal, but I got paid. I didn't care. Um, and the paper cuts sucked.
Oh,
And I was
oh
like,
yeah.
"Ooh, oh my God, my fingers would be bleeding
Oh,
filing those cases." And it was like a mountain of them. So I would be sitting in this conference room all day putting welfare cases in alphabetical order.
oh my gosh.
Terrible job.
Yeah, no, that sounds crazy. I remember when manuscripts were like actual pieces of paper you had to print out and not electronic. And yeah, I got my
Yeah.
fair share of paper cuts then too. Um, what chore do you hate doing?
Oh, folding. Oh, I can't stand folding.
Yeah,
Look, my husband is great because he will do the folding, um, and he'll do it because he knows I can't stand it. But I try to help, but it's terrible. I hate folding. I specifically hate folding fitted sheets. I don't know. It's a torture device. I can't fold a fitted sheet to save my life. If somebody put $1 million down in front of me and said, "Fold this fitted sheet," I'm just gonna be broke because I'm I'm not gonna be able to do it.
there's so many memes about this where it's like just ball it up and put it in the closet. That's my
That's what I
strategy.
wind up doing.
Yep. Okay, what is your biggest fear?
What is my biggest fear? You know what? I guess they always say like the thing that first pops in your mind. My biggest fear is that the first line in my obituary is going to be about Donald Trump. That's my biggest fear. Let's.
That's
I
my
can't.
biggest fear
I
too,
gotta.
actually.
Yeah, I was like, I gotta make sure that I do everything possible so that Donald Trump's name does not appear in my obituary, and definitely not the first
For sure, if I have anything to do with it. And okay, I'm gonna
line.
ask you one more question because I love this question. It says, "What is your middle name?" And I just like this question because you explain like how you got Jemele and like what your middle name is. And I'll end with that question because I know we're running out of time.
So my middle name is Juanita, and when my husband wants to irritate me, he calls me Juanita. Which, so my middle name is my great grandmother's name. Her name was Juanita Eccles, and that's why I was named. My middle name was Juanita, and it was interesting because in writing this book, one of the things I did was try to put together a family tree, and I did that through ancestry.com. Just trying to figure out because there's a whole half of my family that I don't even really know, and that would be my grandfather's side. My mother's father. I don't know anything about that side of the family, even still. And so, as I was doing this research, what I discovered was, I didn't realize my great grandmother was so young when she died. She was like 40 years old. She also got married at 15. I was like, holy crap. It was just all these little details I kind of found out about her. And I thought it was, pretty amazing to find that out. But anyway, that is the backstory behind Juanita.
Okay, I just want to thank Jemele. Thank you for joining us, Jemele, and thank you for our Facebook guests and our questions that we received. Just going to say one last time that you can get a signed copy of Uphill at premiercollectibles.com/Jemele. And I'm going to flip it back over to our real host who's behind the scenes, but I just wanted to thank Jemele one last time. Thanks for joining us, and everyone have a really good day.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.